In the spring of 1926, Charlie Russell knew what was happening to him. It was the same thing that happened to the mythic West of his youth, the land of buffalo and cowboys and Indians. He was dying. That same year, he completed a monumental commissioned mural that actually few people have seen. 2 panels, 43 feet long in all, titled The History of the West. When Russell painted his trademark buffalo skull in the corner and signed his name, he was the highest paid artist in America. It was a long way from Kid Russell, the night-hawking cowboy wrangler who sketched a postcard in 1886 that would make him famous. But it was only a few short months from his grave, and what eventually would become his iconic role in American history. In 1880, a 16-year-old from St. Louis, Missouri, did what a fictional teenager from the same state named Huckleberry Finn would do. He headed off for the territories.
Well, Charlie Russell is a way to learn about the American West, the romance of the American West, and the documentary history of the American West. He was the cowboy artist. This is the story that goes back to the beginning of America, the wandering westward. Charlie Russell told it through cowboys. Mark Twain told it through the Mississippi River.
Charlie's Westwood Trail eventually brought him to Montana's Judith Basin, where he would meet and live for 2 years with a mountain man and trapper before becoming a cowboy, and in the process managed to witness the curtain come down on epic eras in American history. The disappearance of the buffalo, the conquering of the native tribes, barbed wire fencing of the open range, and the end of the Old West as it was.
The mountain man period was only about 20 years. That's all. But the working cowboy period, where there was just working cattle, the horseback all the time, and before the pickup truck took over, that was only about 30 years. So we got about 50 years that we had a real West. You go all the way back, let's just go to Charlie Russell. He caught the last 10 years of a period. If he hadn't, we might not have ever have heard of him. It's the transition that creates this great friction of life.
There's a sense that what they are painting, and really what they want to be painting, is history in the making. We're recording things that are changing so quickly that someone has to get these down so that Americans have a sense of their own history. There was a very strong feeling that, and you get it over and over again in Western artists all the way through, that I've got to capture this before it's gone.
Yeah, at a time in Montana history that things were changing. The buffalo had just been exterminated. The Indians had just been quelled. It was a brief time capsule there of the open range cowboy and everything that entailed.
Charlie Russell got to witness the end of a chapter of our collective Old Testament, and he spent the rest of his life doing something with that vision. Russell told it through cowboys. He also told it through Indians, and he told it through wildlife. To get at who Charlie Russell was and is, to get at what the American West was and is, Montana PBS has been talking to and filming everyone from cowboys to curators, and in the process zigzagging up and down the Rockies and the High Plains from Canada to Texas, logging more than 100 hours of interviews, thousands of pages of transcripts, and turning over every Russell stone we could find. Charlie Russell's trail isn't plowed over. It has been and still is being plowed up and tended, actually quite marvelously, by museums, curators and collectors, art historians, and art lovers.
I do like the wildlife ones because I have an interest for animals and stuff, so I thought it was cool seeing like animals in bronze.
In the very wee small hours of a Saturday morning, Montana PBS took a panoramic tour through a gem of a small museum, the Sid Richardson in Fort Worth, Texas, to look at the range of Russell's work, eavesdropping on the great Russell scholars Brian Dippie and Rick Stewart as they walk back in time.
Russell symbolizes, in fact we've both written about it, is the idea of romance. And romance, you know, is, as people often say, is part myth and part reality. It's what a culture begins to believe in itself about, think of itself. Whether or not it's all real or not isn't as important as the kinds of things that you see in Charlie Russell's art, the kinds of human endeavor that's embodied there, the spirit of adventure, the independence, the conflict, the nobility, the sacrifice. All of that is in these paintings, much like it is in many other types of paintings you see around the world and throughout history.
Well, I see that powerful sense of what will be lost. It was Russell's youth, and I guess it's easy to always romanticize your youth. But Russell had an innate gift that allowed him to turn his own nostalgia into a national and international nostalgia.
Yes.
So much of the world could look at a Russell painting and think, I wish I were alive then.
Yes,
that I could ride into that world and experience it.
When Russell first rode his horse off the cowboy trail and into the art world, he took his easel and his commissioned work for the enjoyment of drinking men in the Shelton Saloon in Utica, Montana. In the lifetime to come, he would paint a world that would capture the American imagination for decades and centuries to come.
You know, I think back to growing up in the 40s when the cowboy was king and kids loved the West and people dressed up in cowboy outfits, and on it goes. I always think, Rick, what happened to you and I is we never quite abandoned our cap pistols.
That's right. Absolutely. We had our cap pistols and we had our Davy Crockett hats. And maybe we come from a generation that sort of inbred in us is the romance of the West. But you know, it's something that even today captivates people around the world.
Almost 40 years later, when Russell painted his last commissioned piece, The History of the West, he didn't do it for saloon patrons. He did it for an art patron and infamous oil man. For decades, the painting was in a private home, and then almost hidden away in a small college library in California, before finally ending up in another oil man's collection in Texas, where it was recently unpacked in an art warehouse.
Thanks, guys.
More than welcome.
This is one mural in two parts that Charles Russell painted really in the last months of his life, in 1926. It's the greatest commission he had outside of the Montana Legislature Commission back in 1911. It's one of only two murals he painted. And this particular mural, unlike the one in Helena, Montana, has not really been seen by people for a very long time.
The painting was panoramic and epic in scope, and with Russell's health failing and his wife Nancy pushing him to complete it, it took a seemingly monumental effort to complete.
I think for me, having looked at Russell's work, all that he did all his life, I kind of see the pain and struggle in some of the paint handling in this work, because there's a few places where it seems like he really wanted to get it down, get it painted, and get it done. And so he rushed on it. Russell was so ill and so infirm at the time the commission came around that one is not surprised that he didn't think about a composition that was new for him. He thought about a series of old compositions that he would stitch together. in a continuous tapestry of scenes. So there are the cowboy scenes, there are the stagecoaches, there are the Indians, there's the wildlife that march through the canvas in his personal panorama of the West.
But in that panorama, Russell included change, big change.
What you find at the very end are 3 little oil derricks that are almost an afterthought. They are painted with one brush stroke, just one time, with not very much paint, and they sort of suspend themselves way off in the horizon, as if Russell was saying, I don't want to put this in the history of the West. I don't want to do this. He wasn't very happy about the arrival of civilization, and he said so many times in his letters. But what's more amusing for me is that down in the brush, not too far from those oil derricks at the end of the mural, is a rattlesnake. One wonders, did he have a commentary on Doheny and the oil and gas people? That was he biting the hand that fed him? We don't know for sure. But I do know that he was so very nostalgic and heartsick for the West that he had known as a young man.
The mural was a triumph for Russell's wife, Nancy, who was also very much Charlie's partner in every sense of the word. She brokered the deal with oilman Edward Doheny for Charlie to be paid $30,000 for the history of the West. At times, Nancy rubbed people wrong, especially Charlie's oldest friends. But she was devoted to her husband, to his work, and to his legacy.
She really, really felt that if she wasn't trying and doing and working to advance Charlie at all times, one scholar wrote that in social situations, Nancy was business, and in business situations, Nancy tried to be social. There's a determination, a commitment to the relationship, a love that she had for Charlie that underpins everything she did.
Montana PBS went out and into Charlie Russell's West, the Montana landscape, with a lifelong Russell ephemera collector and CMR aficionado from Great Falls, to the spot where Russell probably saw the scene he wanted to paint for what many would consider his masterpiece.
Today here we are on the Missouri at a place called, looking across at a place called Dead Man Coulee, and my guess would be that he wasn't even here when he painted this, but he remembered this spot. If you had a picture, a painting, a copy of when the land belonged to God, you could stand right here and see for a fact that this is where Charlie was at one time, some or another, and the view here must have struck him in a big way, because he picked a beautiful spot to paint one of his masters, if not the master painting. I'm coming up the north side of the hill, just like Charlie painted the buffalo, and the big old bull was in the lead, the one that the gentleman at the Montana Club said that it wasn't very good, and Charlie said it was the best damn buffalo he'd ever painted. That painting was paradise to Charlie, and that had something to do with the title. It was almost a spiritual thing with him.
The painting might also have been called When the Land Belonged to God and the Indians.
Charlie loved the Indians, and he had a feeling in his heart for them, and the way they lived, their free spirit, their life, and his love of this land and the beauty and how they loved it. And then one time him and Teddy Blue Abbott were talking while they were on a day herd, and they were talking about how much they both would have loved to be Indians. And Charlie told him, he says, yeah, and for $40 a month we're taking it all away from them, you know, what they loved and how they lived.
If he and Teddy Blue Abbott had regrets about what they took, Charlie Russell tried, in his own way, to give things back, in his paintings and sculptures and his stories.
When I first saw When the Land Belonged to God, I knew then that Charlie Russell got what Indians were about. When you look at it and you see all those buffalo, and I thought he understood Indians. He got the environment, and with that, you know, we were the first environmentalist, I always say, and he got that about us.
Artists are chroniclers of their times, and he was like a sponge, and he was feeling it. And he didn't just decorate stuff or fill in spots. He was trying to be true. And by doing that, he was honoring Native Americans. I believe with every stroke that he ever laid down of a Native American was honoring the people and trying to show them in their best possible light. And he was not a propagandist. And I believe that to my soul. And I believe he was an inspired artist. And Charles M. Russell has had a lasting impact on me, whether I want to admit it or not.
I won't have to chop no wood. I can be better, I can be good. I can be any way that I feel one of these days. Be a woman that's dressed in black. Be a hobo by the railroad track. I'll be gone like the wayward wind one of these days.
To take a glimpse at CMR's legacy today, Montana PBS filmed the 150th anniversary celebration of Charlie's birth at the 2014 Russell Auction in Great Falls. It was an homage to the artist, but also a celebration of the West, what it was, is, and will be. At the popular Quick Draw event, contemporary artist and amateur historian Charlie Fritz finished a painting in the morning, and in the afternoon sold it to a bidder for the same $30,000 that Charlie Russell was paid for the history of the West.
When you do historical paintings or start to use the human figure and the activities of humans on this landscape, then the landscape becomes a stage, and you're looking for those perfect elements that you can put the human figures against. The landscape becomes a foil that you put your figures and your story against.
The world of Western art is a world that has ebbed and flowed in the years since Charlie Russell cowboyed on the open range. But underneath it all, the foil, the stage, and always the same stage, is the landscape of the American West. Bridging the 19th and 20th centuries, Charles M. Russell saw curtains come down and curtains rise. The Montana PBS documentary C.M. Russell and the American West will be a film about Charlie Russell and his story, but it will also be a film about his subject matter, the American West, an epic landscape with an epic story.
The landscape dominates everybody, one way or the other. If you're in a big city, you're wanting to get out of it. You're wanting to have a certain time of your life, weekly or monthly or yearly, that you're going out to, you want to be in the landscape, because that's where we are and where we came from and where we'll go.
When you do a painting in central Montana, and someone's going to look at that final finished product in Ohio or New York or Arizona, something has to be special about that painting in order for that painting to communicate and be a strong painting and bring out an emotional response in those people that view it. I think Charlie Russell always stayed quite true to himself and to his message, and he wanted to communicate what he loved.
Message, story, time and place, the elements of Charlie's art, both his paintings and sculpture, as well as his illustrated letters and stories, were the elements at the core of what would become one of the great American art forms. film. Charlie and Nancy Russell were in California at the beginning of the Hollywood film industry, and at the beginning of the explosion of what would become American film's dominant genre, the Western. Charlie Russell watched what Hollywood was doing with the history of his West. And Hollywood, from Will Rogers to Douglas Fairbanks, Hollywood watched Charlie.
Russell's subject matter can be considered romantic or idealized. I think in part, we forget that he predates movies. And, really the movies took their cue from Russell and Remington and artists like that.
Where do you think you're going? Well, I come over here to talk to them three fellas that Tom Hope caught over on the Pinon.
Russell's bona fides were solid by the time he got to California in the 20s, at the time when Western movies were really taking off. And many of the people making Western movies, the Harry Careys and the John Fords and the William S. Harts, all wanted to be around him, not just because he was a colorful guy, of course because he was a colorful guy and hail fellow well met, but they felt like he was a source. They could learn how to make better Westerns by being around Charlie Russell.
If the American Revolution was our nation's birth and the Civil War was our crucible, in many ways it is the American West that has become the stage for our mythic story. It helped shape and tell Americans who they were and are, not only to themselves, but to the world.
The tall tale has always been a part of the American West. Davy Crockett had made it famous in his almanacs and in his autobiography and the tall tales he told. And of course, every cowboy campfire, the most popular character was the guy who could tell the best stories. And no story was worth telling if you couldn't improve upon it. This was the world that Charles Russell had grown up in. These are the kind of people he knew. It's a tradition that Russell continues in his art, because his art is narrative for the most part.
The cowboy artist had become the cowboy character, as well as the chronicler of the Plains Indian, and of a time when the West belonged to God. Making a documentary film about Charles M. Russell is a chance to look at a great and complex intersection of epic landscape and peoples, geography, destiny, art, culture, a transitional period in American history, and the story of an iconic American who saw it all.
There's a whole bunch of things about Charlie, his warmth, his naturalness, his Americanness, and of course the body of work he left behind that make you want to put him in this pantheon of classic Americans, a Walt Whitman to a Mark Twain to a Will Rogers. There's a folksiness here that they all had and that Charlie Russell had. Now, granted, he's perhaps less known than all of them, but I guarantee you they would have all admired each other if they could have all been in the same room together.
Charlie Russell is one of two statues that Montanans chose to put in the U.S. Capitol. Every state gets two. And isn't it interesting that Montana, this state that some people see as a raw-boned, rough, hang-em-high, ask-questions-later state, the two people they chose was a welfare worker named Jeanette Rankin, who was the first woman elected to Congress, and an artist, Charlie Russell, who showed us what it was like before even he got here and did it accurately. I think Montanans are in love with creative people, both men and women. And Charlie Russell, probably the patron saint of Montana, is an example of what it is down deep Montanans really love.